So hello and welcome into my kitchen. If we haven't met before, my name is Julie with Small Farm Living, and I am participating this month in the Every Bit Counts challenge hosted by Jessica over at Three Rivers Homestead. And if you're not familiar with what that is, it's where we preserve some every day in the day of August. So I'm going to be doing all kinds of things this week, so I hope you will join me. And just to note, I'm going to be doing a voiceover because I have a lot of people that come in and out of my house constantly and make a lot of noise. So I hope you'll stick around and see what we're doing this week. So first thing, I am down in my field and I have this big patch of basil. So I'm just going to clip a bunch of it. And you will see by the time I get done clipping just a little bit off of each plant, I still have a whole bunch of basil left. And I have this basket full. So we're going to take this up into the house. And we're going to get it in the sink and give it a good rinse. It's not really too dirty, but I wanted to get off any field dirt that might be on there. And then I'm just going to gather them up, and I'm going to load up a couple strainers and let them just kind of sit and work for a little bit to get them as dry as possible. And as you can see, I did get a lot of basil, even though it didn't look like I hardly picked anything. So after it has sat for a little while, I am going to take it and I'm going to just take and grab and rip off all of the leaves that I want to use for this pesto. And I don't use all of them. Some of the larger leaves are a little on the woody side, and I don't like to use those in my pesto. I just don't feel like the processor that I have anyway breaks them down good enough for me. And so I'm just going to stand here very quickly, get all the leaves pulled off. And then I'm going to show you in a little bit what I do with the leaves that I didn't use. And then I'm going to just grab handfuls. It's still very damp even though it drained for a while. And I'm going to load up my salad spinner. And you can see how wet they still are. They're still sticking to my hand. And I just want to get out as much water as possible because I don't want my pesto to be watery in any way. So they're going to get a little ride in the salad spinner. There's not a whole lot more water coming off, but every little bit counts. Then I'm going to drop them onto a kitchen towel that I have on the counter. And then I'm just going to take a paper towel and put it over top and blot the rest of the water that I can get off before we start doing our recipe. And you see how my nails have gotten stained just from the basil? I actually did a really quick, I think it's under a minute video on a YouTube short that I'll link down below on a very simple and easy trick to get your nails clean after they've gotten stained from the garden. So now the leaves that I didn't use, I just set aside, and I will use these in salads or on top of pizza throughout the week. So now I'm going to take 2 cups of my leaves and I'm going to just get them shredded up as fine as possible in my processor. I always have to scrape down the sides because they always get stuck. And then I'll just give it another little bit of a whirl just to be sure I get them as minced as possible. I will put in the oil. I actually use walnuts instead of pine nuts. I like the flavor better and they are a heck of a lot cheaper. So after I get those in, then I'm going to grab my salt and pepper, and this is just an optional thing that I find that I really like the flavor with it in there. Putting in my Parmesan cheese, and then I'm going to blend this all together until it is very well incorporated. And sometimes it takes a couple of times to stop it, scrape down the sides, and get it going again. Just depends. I think it only took me 2 tries this time. But after I get that all nice and blended, oh, these little popsicles. These are made for popsicles specifically, but I did see on a video somewhere quite a while back where they used this to store their pesto in, and I did fill a few in a previous batch that I did, and I thought I would try it again to see if I could find an easier way to do it. I tried a funnel and that didn't work last time just because my spout of my funnel wasn't big enough. So I thought I would load up a Ziploc bag, kind of like a piping bag, and cut off the tip and squirt it down in there. And I mean, it is working, but I have to say it is very tedious and the process is very slow to get it down in there because if you go too fast, it just wants to come up and over the top. So I actually only ended up doing, I think, a total of 3 of these because I just got so annoyed with it, and it was just taking up way too much of my time. You can see it gets all messy at the top and where you try to zip it shut. So I just, you know, nice try, but no thanks. And then you can see my counter. I mean, this is the result of what happens just trying to get it all in there. It just goes everywhere. So bagged that idea, and I went back to just putting it in Ziploc bags. And you can see the lighter color on the second batch. In the video that I shared, you will see what the ingredient is that I put in it to make it lighter. Next day I was down in the garden and I was harvesting some zucchini. And back up in the house, I actually have a counter full of zucchini. So I just got 2 of them, gave them a quick rinse off, and then I am going to just chop the top and the bottom off. And yes, I probably should have gotten my cutting board out, but I'm trying to be as careful as possible so I don't whack my countertop too bad. And then I cut these in half, and then I scrape out the center. And the reason why I do this is because, as you can see, the seeds, even in these smaller ones, are already fairly good sized. And I am, I guess what you'd call a texture snob, and I will find any piece of seed in the bread that didn't get taken out. So I try to be very diligent about that. And my girls are going to thank me in a little while because I'm going to take them down and give them a snack. And I'm just going to get this all shredded up so that I can get what I need for my recipe. Now this recipe calls for 3 eggs, and these are from my girls. And then it calls for a cup of oil, and sometimes I do applesauce, so you can replace it 1 for 1. So I'll do a half a cup of oil and a half a cup of applesauce. And this applesauce is dark because it has cinnamon mixed into it. And I made kind of a mess slopping it in there because the applesauce was a little heavy. So after I get that in there, then I am going to take 2 cups of sugar. It does seem like a lot. It ends up being like a cup of sugar per loaf. You can adjust that if you don't want as much. I put in my zucchini and give or take 2 teaspoons of vanilla. And then I am going to get that all whirled together until it is incorporated. And for whatever reason, I am not sure why, it just really seems like the zucchini wants to wrap itself around my paddle. So I always have to lift it up and scrape the paddle off. And then I scrape down the sides a little bit and give it another quick little whirl before I start putting in my dry ingredients, which this calls for 3 cups of flour. And I will put in a full 2 cups. And then on the 3rd cup, I put in half of it and kept the other half in the mixing cup. I really probably could have gone down to a quarter. But the reason why I like to do this is because it's easier for me to incorporate all my dry ingredients without having to get a separate bowl. And so I am just putting in the salt, the cinnamon, the allspice, and the nutmeg, and the baking powder. And if you want the recipe, let me know and I will try to get that added down into the description. It's really good. It's almost like a spiced zucchini cake, and it's a recipe that came from my great-grandmother and has just kind of been passed down over the years. So I'm just going to mix this all together as carefully as possible without making a mess in my little measuring cup. And then once I have it mixed together, I will get that dumped into the bowl with the rest of the ingredients. And then I will get this all mixed and incorporated together. And I have to tell you, this bread, when you're making it and also when it's baking in the oven, it just smells like fall. And I'm sure it's the cinnamon and the nutmeg and the allspice, but it is delicious. Even my daughter came up and said, "Oh, I love that smell." But I'm just going to get these put into both of my loaf pans as evenly as I can. And I won't bore you with the bowl scraping, but I am a bowl scraper. I will get it all out off camera. And this is what we look like. We baked it for an hour, and then this is what they looked like when they came out. And then after they have cooled, I just take them and I start slicing them. I like to pre-slice. It's just easier for us when we thaw them out to use them, to have them pre-sliced. And you can see the 2 dark ones were the ones with the applesauce, and the other 2 were just straight oil in the baking process. So I freeze those in Ziploc bags, and then I will pop the opening or I will pop it open before I put it into my freezer bag. And the reason why I do this is because when you stick them in the machine to vacuum all of the air out, if you don't have the Ziploc bag open as well, it won't pull any of the air that is still trapped inside the Ziploc bag out. So by doing that, I get a nice tight seal around my bread, and it just helps it store longer in the refrigerator. I've actually had it in there for over a year and it still tastes awesome. So here's my 4 loaves all sealed and labeled and ready to go into the freezer. And because we don't waste anything around here, I do wash my eggs out, and then I just set them anywhere on my counter or a cooling rack to dry them. And then once they are dried, I take a little Ziploc bag and stick them inside and just crush them up with my hands. And I will use these out in the garden for slug control. I actually can powder them up and mix them into a special tomato fertilizer that I put in the planting hole at the time of planting, or stick them in my compost for the worms. Now the next morning I went down because my beans are starting to just go gangbusters, and you can see the blooms everywhere, and hiding in there are actually beans. They're always hard to see, but I'm just going to get the beans that are the size that I want. And I don't know about you, but I think beans are like zucchini. You go out one day and you're like, oh, they're kind of close, maybe I'll wait one more day, and you go out the next day and you're like, holy cramoly, where did you come from? You're huge. But I like the young tender green beans when I can beans. It's just a preference. Let me know, do you guys actually can any size of bean, or do you prefer the smaller ones? I just, again, it's a preference thing. I grew up just eating the more tender young green beans. So I'm standing here and pulling out the ones that are just a little larger than I like for canning. And you can see here the comparison. The one on the bottom I use for canning, and the one on the top are the ones that I'm setting aside. Now the ones that I'm setting aside, they will not go to waste. We are going to do something else with these in a later video. I am at the end of the week here, so I'm not so sure that I will have time to put this into this video, but definitely next video. And I'm curious too, let me know in the comments, do you snap your beans or do you cut them? I grew up with my grandmother and my mother snapping beans, and I always found that by the time we were done snapping beans, the tips of my fingers just felt raw, and it drove me crazy. So as I got older and started doing my own thing, I started just lining up a row of beans that were all relatively the same size and chopping off each of the ends. And it just makes it easier for me. I get into a rhythm and I can really fly through the beans this way. And then I chop them into as even of pieces as I can. And then I always, of course, have the end pieces that are not quite as uniform. But again, they all eat the same, so not a problem. And I just throw the scraps into a bowl, and these will go down into the compost pile that'll feed my garden in the following years to come. So again, I just put them all in a line like this. Give them a little chippy choppy, get the ends off. And like I mentioned before, I'm a texture snob, so I do not like the feel of the little pointy ends in there either. So, and you know, if you like them, that's great. For me, I don't. Take them off, and again, just goes to the compost. No big deal. So now that I have my bowl all completely done, I pulled my hot jars out, and the jars are very hot. I'm using pints, so I'm using a half a teaspoon of canning salt per jar. And you don't have to put salt in if you don't want to. It's just a preference. I actually like the flavor. And then they're ready to go. And then I'm going to grab my funnel, and I'm going to just start grabbing some green beans and dumping them into my jar. And once I get them as high as I feel I can do, which I'm always overzealous and I got too many in there, but you give them a little bit of a tamp down and it settles them a little bit. I had to take some out and put them back in the bowl, but you tamp them down and then it makes a little bit more room. So I just grab a few extra beans and I just get them worked in there until they're about at the 1 inch of head space. And then I grab some of my hot water, get my funnel back on there, and then I again pour the water in until it comes up to the 1 inch of head space. And once they are there, I will take my handy dandy plastic chopstick and I will start working it around the outside. And the jar is very hot by this point. It's hard to touch it. but I get my beans all debubble, and then I will take a paper towel that's wet with hot water and wipe the rim off just in case there's any residue, and I will get my lids put on. The lids were also pre-rinsed and just sitting in a bowl of really warm water. I'll get my jar lifter and I'll get this put over into the canner. And I do like to use 4 jars canning lids. They are my preferred method, or they are my preferred lid of choice these days. And I am working on becoming an affiliate and getting a discount code for you. So if I get that before this video comes out, I will link that in the description below. But again, I am not going to bore you with filling up every jar for my canner. It's basically the same old thing, just getting the beans in, getting them tamped down, debubbling, making sure the beans and the liquid are up to the 1 inch of headspace, getting my lids and my rings on. And you can see I got my bottom loaded, put on the second rack, and I only ended up with 2 more. And there's my 4 jars canning lids. So I ended up with 10 total, I believe. And this is my All-American 921 pressure canner, which I love. They are a little expensive, but I got a really good deal on it. So you just kind of have to make sure the lid is as even as possible all the way around. I just use the finger method. It works just fine for me. And then you lift up opposite bolts and just barely tighten them down to get the spacing even. And then once you've got all sets of bolts up and you've got them lightly screwed down, then you just go back and grab a hold of the first ones that you did and really give them a good tightening down. And then you're ready to turn up the heat and get them going. Now, I processed those for 20 minutes, and this is what they look like when they're all done. So these will sit for 24 hours. Now, here is mint. I really thought that my camera was filming when I went out and cut my mint, but it wasn't. So you are seeing the end result, which I took them all off the stems, gave them a wash, patted them dry, put them on the dehydrator, and they dehydrated. Oh, I think it was probably about 6 or 7 hours. And it's a pretty low temperature for herbs and things. I think it's like 110 on my dehydrator. And then I have this cute little jar, and I just will get these all put in here while I make a little bit of mess in the process. And once they're all nice and tucked in, I'll get the lid put on and snapped shut, and then we will have some mint for some tea or maybe some tinctures for in the fall. Oh, cherries, cherries, cherries. If you were here for my first video, it was just the first 2 days of August, we focused on cherries. And I set a whole bunch aside in the refrigerator for fresh eating. And I think we all ate fresh cherries until we literally just got tired of eating fresh cherries. So I wanted to take the rest out of the refrigerator to not lose them. And same process as I did before. I just gave them a wash, put them in the strainer, and then stood and pitted the cherries. And I had some good suggestions in my comments about cherry pitters that actually pit more than 1 cherry at a time. So next year I might be looking into getting one of those. But I got a little ahead of myself. I forgot to get my water with my citric acid in there, which is just to keep the insides of the cherry and where you put the cherry pitter through on the outside from browning. And so I will get that running while I finish pitting my cherries. And like I mentioned in the last video, pitting cherries is not my favorite task. It's messy, it's time consuming, and it makes my hand hurt, but I absolutely love cherries, so it's worth it. So I'm just working my way through, and you can see I'm getting closer and closer, and I am almost done. I am so excited. And hallelujah, I am done pitting cherries for the season. So I'm just getting these all rinsed off. And then I am going to take and wash my hands with my gloves on, just like I would my regular hands. And that is because I use the same pair of gloves over and over and over again when it's not anything nasty and icky like meat products or anything. But when I'm just processing stuff, I use them until I absolutely can't use them anymore. So they will just sit there next to the sink until I need them again. Now I put down a cookie sheet with some freezer paper and a paper towel, and I am just laying the cherries out on these to absorb any additional water that is still inside of them. getting them evenly spaced, and then I will take a paper towel and just pat the tops of them as dry as possible. And then once they have dried for a little bit on the counter, I will get them put in the freezer. And I just had to share with you my celebratory wash of my cherry pitter so I can put this baby away and not look at it again until next year. So here are the cherries when they were completely frozen. I let them sit in there for about a day and a half before I started putting them in bags. But these little bags, they're pre-made, and I got them off of Amazon. And they're just kind of fiddly. I mean, they work great for a lot of things, but holding them open is really tough. And even my like Ziploc bag holder doesn't work very well because the mouth is so narrow, it doesn't hold it open wide enough. But once I get them all loaded into the bags and start vacuum sealing them, I like to wiggle them around so that they are in as flat of a layer as possible. That way when I stick these out in the freezer, I can stack them one on top of each other, and it just makes for a much tidier storage space in my freezer. So I'm getting these dated, and then I will get them put in the freezer for later use. Now I went down to the garden the following day and I harvested a bunch more of that basil that was still left in the field, and I am going to load up my dehydrator full of basil. And we use a lot, and I mean a lot, of dried basil in so many different recipes. And once I start canning tomatoes and I make sauces and even my soups, I use a lot of this dried basil in those recipes. I like to use it dried. It just, to me anyway, it just tends to leave less of a bitter flavor and just gives you that good, nice, mellow flavor of the basil. So I'm just going to work my way through all those, and once I've got them loaded, I'm going to bring them in, and I am going to stack them all into my favorite dehydrator. I wish I could find another one of these. I would replace my round Nesco. But then I'm going to get the lid put on, and then I'm going to turn it on and let them dry. And it takes, again, about 5 to 6 hours. And then I just got them put into this jar with the little lid on, and I will continue filling that later. So next day, I had picked a whole bunch of blackberries one day, and I realized I didn't quite have enough for the recipe. So I went down this morning and I finished picking the rest, and we are going to be making blackberry simple syrup. And it calls for 12 cups of blackberries, a 1/4 cup of water, and 2 cups of sugar. And it always feels like so much sugar, but blackberries really need some sugar in order to not be bitter. And then I had to use 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. And then I just mixed this all together until it was incorporated. And then we have to bring this up to a boil. And you can see it kind of looks like it's boiling in some spots, but if you stir it, it stirs the boil down. So I'm just letting it come back up to a boil. And here we definitely are boiling, so I'll give it another stir. And then this is going to get turned down, and we're going to simmer it for about 20 minutes, stirring it occasionally throughout the process, just to make sure it's getting cooked evenly and nothing is sticking to the bottom. And then once the 20 minutes are up, we are going to take my immersion blender, and I am going to just work it around, making sure that I have all of the berries as pureed as possible. And then we are going to take it and put it over into a strainer. Now, I started with this little strainer, and I don't know what I was thinking because that's not my normal process. So after one batch of doing it in this small strainer, I moved over to this big strainer and dumped it in there, and it goes much quicker in this one. And then I got a spatula so I could just kind of tamp down and get out as much juice as possible. Then I scrape all the berries out and reload and do it again. And I usually do like, I don't know, 3 to 4 scoops just so I don't slop over the edge. And then once all of the juice is done, I will ladle it into my hot jars. I'm just doing pints. And I couldn't remember how many jars this batch did, but it ended up doing 3. And I just get them up to the 1 inch of headspace. Again, wipe the tops with a hot damp paper towel. Get a hot 4 jars canning lid out of the water that I have pre-rinsed them and let them sit in. And then I put the ring on. And then I don't know what I was thinking, but I just grabbed a hold of this hot jar and went over to put it in the canner and I was like, girl, what are you doing? So I went and got my jar lifter and got the second jar in there and got the third jar in there and made sure that the water was up over the top of the jars. And I heard a funny noise. And when I got done canning, I opened it up and I was able to pull out 2 jars, and this is what happened. So even though my jars were hot, my liquid was hot, and the canner water was hot, one of my jars broke, and it must have just been a weak jar. I use them over and over and over again, and sometimes this happens in canning. It's just a little disheartening because of all the work you just put into making it, and then it's ruined. All right, we made it to the end of week 2 of the Every Bit Counts challenge, and of course next week we'll have a whole bunch more stuff we're going to preserve, so I hope that you will join me then. And for now, thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you next time.